All right, what's up, guys, and welcome to the Isn't It Crazy podcast. I'm your host, Rudy Perez, and if you're listening to this on Spotify or anywhere else you get this podcast from, just know that I do have a video version of the show on YouTube. Just go on there and search up the Isn't It Crazy podcast, and while you're there, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. All right, pretty quick and easy episode this week. I didn't make an episode last week because it was my girlfriend's birthday. Happy birthday, Jazz. And I also needed a break, so it all kind of worked out. And this episode, I wanted to do fan questions. So I went on Instagram and Snapchat and asked my followers and listeners if there was any questions that they wanted me to answer on the podcast. And shout out to everybody who took the time to ask the questions. And what's interesting was that on Instagram, it was when you ask the question, your name's attached to the question. So most of the questions were positive. On Snapchat, I had to use a third party app called YOLO, which allowed you to ask anonymous questions. And given that it was anonymous, people took the liberty to ask weird, mean, and funny questions. So I thought I'd start with the Instagram ones first and then move on to the Snapchat ones. All right, one of the first Instagram ones I got was from A1_Garibay. By the way, great Instagram page if you guys are interested in cryptocurrency, the stock exchange, or motorcycles. I'm sure he'd be glad to answer any of the questions you guys have pertaining to those subjects. But his question is, what made you start creating podcasts and what was your first few steps towards it? The first thing that made me start a podcast was listening to Joe Rogan and the Fighter and the Kid podcast, Criminal, and podcasts like Paranormal Activity. You know, I listened to them so long that I started thinking to myself, these guys are making money just by having conversations with people they find interesting or voicing their opinions or just bringing in their friends and having a silly goose time and just having fun with it. So one day I asked myself, why not me? Why can't I do that? Why can't I voice my opinions and bring in my friends and people I find interesting and get paid for it? So one of the first steps I took was I went on YouTube and I just searched up the how to make a podcast. And I found a couple of videos that show you the basics on how to get started. And I just evolved from there. My first episode, I didn't have a chair or a mic and it was just me. So the more I got into the subject, the more passionate I got about it, the more I fell in love with it, the more fun I had with it. And things just grew from there. I got a chair, I got a second mic. Now I could bring in a guest, and I made a whole studio in my room. So everything started to grow bigger and bigger, and I learned so much. And starting a podcast was probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. At the beginning, it was intimidating. I thought about what are people going to think when they hear I have a podcast? Will anybody listen? And I just took a leap of faith. And now, looking back at it, I'm happy I did. So, great question. Thank you for asking that. Second question comes from Plantitas LLC. Now, Plantitas has been a great supporter of the podcast. Noemi has been on the podcast a couple times, and her work is featured all over my studio. Actually, now I got the artificial succulents here. I got a real succulent by the window, and if you guys are looking for a great Mother's Day gift or just something to decorate your room, it looks great all year long. I suggest you guys go check out Plantitas LLC. And her question was, will your lovely girlfriend become your permanent guest? Love the vibe when y'all together. I love it too. What makes a great podcast is chemistry, and me and Jazz have a lot of that, given that she's my girlfriend. But, I'm comfortable around her and I can be myself. And the thing is, that creates great content, interesting conversations, funny conversations. But as far as permanent goes, I'm going to go with no, because from the start of creating this podcast, I wanted to bring in people from all walks of life that I was interested in and curious about so I could sit them down and ask them questions that I wanted to know. So that's the direction I want to take the podcast with. But I love having Jess on the podcast, and she's always down to come in if somebody cancels or I'm running low on guests. And so something tells me that you guys will see a lot of her. She'll be a recurring guest, and just keep an eye out for that content if that's one of your favorites. All right. Second question comes from underscore Chris94. Do you remember the gray Nike shorts you let Sergio borrow for some bike ride? Laughing emoji. Um, no, I don't remember those Nike shorts, but I am notorious for losing articles of clothing. If you ask my mom, she used to take me to the Children's Place and Old Navy, and in a week I would lose the hats, sweaters, t-shirts that she bought for me, and nothing's changed, obviously. I don't remember the Nike shorts, but if you have them, or maybe you have them on when you ask this question, keep them. They're yours. Enjoy. They were expensive, and I'm kind of sad I lost Nike shorts, to be honest. Yeah, that's the best way I can answer that question. Another question is Indian Boundaries. He asked, "What's your favorite rock band?" If you're asking about rock bands today, I probably can't answer that question. I don't really listen to modern rock, but the old rock, 70s, 80s, Motley Crue, Leonard Skinner, Guns N' Roses, 80s, ADDC, all those are great. To me, I would say Motley Crue is my favorite, but that era of rock is so interesting to me because of the way, the ups and downs of it. From them touring the whole world and becoming rock legends and making great music throughout the way to the dark side of that era, which was like drug use and overdoses and trashing hotel rooms. And the best part was just them doing crazy shit for the sake of doing crazy shit. It was a lifestyle, and it's a very interesting lifestyle to me. So yeah, I would go with the 70s, 80s genre of rock. And I would say Motley Crue is one of my favorite rock bands. If you guys like Motley Crue too, they have a great biopic on Netflix called The Dirt. I just suggest you guys check it out. Now, the last question I got from Instagram was Noemi, and she asks, I've seen clips on social media of shirts that say podcast. Is this a change of name in the future? I'm guessing you're talking about the only podcast t-shirts that I usually wear. I haven't seen any clips, but I'm glad that people find that interesting and funny and they like to wear stuff like that because I will in the future try to sell that. Hopefully it's not copyrighted by the time I try it. Uh as far as changing the name of the podcast, I can't. No, you can't do that just because of brand recognition, like I've put in the work and to get the Isn't It Crazy logo out into the world. So changing the name would probably not be a good idea. So I'm going to stick to the Isn't It Crazy podcast and what everything that pertains to that brand. But the only podcast thing will be part of the Isn't It Crazy podcast, if that answers your question. Thank you guys on Instagram for asking those questions. They were pretty good, positive, like I said. Let's move on to the Snapchat ones. Let's just start with this one. Why does your podcast suck? The funny thing was that the person who asked this question actually wrote, "Why does you podcast suck?" So I could be petty and ask you, "Why does your grammar suck?" But anything when you start it, I'm sure Gordon Ramsay's first dish wasn't the best dish. I'm sure Steven Spielberg's first movie wasn't the best movie. I'm sure Joe Rogan's podcast wasn't the best podcast at the beginning, but that's the fun in it. You get to evolve and grow as you go along. And if you look at my first episode and one of my recent episodes, it's night and day because I've learned techniques and different ways to deliver a better podcast. And also just becoming more comfortable sitting in front of a camera and voicing my opinion. It's all just a matter of time and how much work I'm willing to put in it. Comments like this don't really help me because I'm my biggest critic. I think there's things that suck about the podcast and it kind of eats away at me, but it motivates me to become better and fix the problems that I think I have when it comes to the podcast. These comments, I would like them if you're going to say it sucks, You're entitled to your own opinion, but at least tell me why it sucks. That way I could become better. But thank you for asking that question. Maybe down the road, you could give me another listen and you'll like it more when I get better techniques, better delivery, more entertaining content. Hopefully it doesn't suck by then. But if it does, now you know. You could still say it sucks, but at least tell me why it sucks. Let's see. This one was funny. Are you ready to get dick down? I'm guessing just because it was anonymous, they thought they could ask this question. As a heterosexual male, I don't think I'll ever be ready to get dick down. If I ever do get dick down, I'm probably getting raped. Hopefully that doesn't happen. That sounds horrific. But I think the only people trying to get dick down are the girls trying to have a hot girl summer this year. So no, I'm not ready to get dick down, if that answers your question. Let's see. How do you feel about Latinx? I don't really feel anything for Latinx. I get that we live in a woke world where people want to be courteous to other people and not assume their gender. The only thing I would say about that is if you want to be viewed or portrayed as something, you have to tell me before I just assume. And you can't get mad if I just assume and you didn't tell me because I can't read your mind. As far as Latinx goes, we could probably teach the younger generation to be more like, ask about Latinx. What are you? Do you identify as a man or a woman? But the whole Latino, Latina, teaching or changing the way people use that in the older generation would be so hard. The Latino, Latina generation, like the older generation, is rooted in heritage. So that's part of their heritage, and trying to change somebody's heritage isn't gonna go well. Trying to explain Latinx to a Hispanic grandma is pretty fucking hard. And they're so hard-headed, they probably wouldn't even change even if you tried. So just leave the grandmas alone. If you guys want to teach the younger generation about Latinx and being more accepting when it comes to what you want to be identified as, go for it. I would say, why fix it if it's not broken? No one ever had an issue about Latino, Latina until this whole woke movement comes. And if it is like a phase in human history, then it's going to go. And I guarantee you Latinx is going to go with it. And we're going to go back to Latino, Latina. So I don't have some hard stance in it. If you want to do it, go for it. If you don't, and you want to uphold the heritage that you learned and you lived with most of your life, do that too. If you are trying to give everybody a choice and make them comfortable, just let them do whatever they want. If you don't get offended if they don't use Latinx. That's how I feel about Latinx. Hopefully that answered your question. What's the best part of having a podcast? The best part about having a podcast is being able to bring in my friends or people that I find interesting and asking them questions that I'm curious about. I don't think I would have had conversations with certain people if it wasn't because of this medium. And I get to bring in great guests like Vlad Dad and Sev Lesker and, Carlos Zamora, and ask them questions about things that I find interesting, and I learn more about it. I become a better person, and I get to meet interesting people. So yeah, that's probably one of the best parts. Other than that, I would say one of the best parts of having a podcast is just getting the satisfaction of achieving a goal, something that I'm passionate about, something that makes me happy. And I love that feeling I get at the end of a podcast when I finish it and it's done and ready to get uploaded because I put in the work. I made sure to get a little better each and every time, and I couldn't ask for more satisfying feeling than that. Okay, let's see. We got some fight questions. 2 fight questions, actually. I got one that says, who do you got, John Jones or Francis Ngannou? John Jones all day. If you ask if this fight was made, and the betting odds were out, I would bet every single penny I have in my savings on John Jones. You know, Francis Ngannou, if you don't know who he is, he's the world heavyweight champion in the UFC. And this guy is huge and has killer power in his hands, you know, one knockout punches. And that does sound scary, and I could see a lot of people picking Francis Ngannou because of that, because he is the bigger guy. He does have the knockout power, but y'all must have forgot. Like Royce Jr. said, y'all must have fucking forgot. John Jones is one of the best fighters the UFC has ever seen, and not just because he's strong and physical, it's because he's skilled and he's smart. And I think if you go back to the Connor saying, precision and timing beat power and speed every single time, then this fight is that. John Jones is the precision and timing when Francis Ngannou is the power and speed. And I just see John Jones outskilling Francis Ngannou and winning the fight 9 times out of 10. You know, Francis Ngannou can connect, but John Jones does have a pretty good chin, does have the smarts to maybe take him down or pick him apart from the outside. And I just see John Jones winning this fight pretty easily. You know, it might take him a couple rounds to wear down Francis Ngannou, but if he gets him to the later rounds, he's got that fight in the bag. Hopefully Scrooge McDuck Dana pays John Jones what he deserves for moving up and making one of the best fights in UFC history. But hopefully we get to see it. But if it does happen, just know my bet is on John Jones. The next one is, who do you think will win between Ben Askren and Jake Paul? This fight is on Saturday, April 17th. And if you guys don't know who Ben Askren is, he was a former UFC fighter and a Bellator champion. I'm sure you guys know who Jake Paul is. He's a very famous YouTuber. And at first I thought YouTubers fighting celebrities was a little silly, but this one actually pretty interesting. You know, Ben Askren isn't the greatest at throwing punches. You know, most of his allure and legend in the UFC and Bellator fights were because of his grappling and his wrestling. Something you can't do when it comes to a boxing match, which is this. They're boxing. And I'm sure this is why Jake Paul picked Ben Askren. And I'm sure that's why a lot of people would pick Jake Paul to win this fight, because in the highlights that he posts, it looks like he is pretty good, you know, but they're only showing you the good parts of the sparring. They're not showing you the whole thing. So I'm sure there's a lot of bad and good all mixed in there together. And the same thing goes for Ben, you know, they're not showing you the bad parts of his striking. They're just showing you the best parts of what he's learning. And if I had to pick somebody, I'm going to pick Ben Askren just because he's been in there with actual fighters like Robbie Lawler, George Masvidal, and Damian Maia. It just seems like he would be more calm and composed and have an actual strategy on how to beat Jake Paul, when Jake Paul has fought Nate Robinson and some guy named Gibby from YouTube. Guys that have never been able to fight, or guys that were never fighters to begin with. So I think Jake Paul has a very false sense of reality when it comes to the fight game. You know, he thinks because he fought those guys, he can step in the ring with an actual fighter. But I think he has a very rude awakening coming on April 17th. And I'm going to just pick Ben Askren. You know, hopefully Ben gets it done for the MMA side. And Jake Paul, you know, part of me does want Jake Paul to win just to see what would happen afterwards. Like, would he fight a better, more strike-known fighter? Maybe like no, not Dylan Tannis. He does grappling too. I don't know. Somebody who legitimately is known for his striking, that would be pretty great too. But if Ben beats you, all those other fights go down the tube. But we'll see come April 17th who will win. I got my money on Ben. If that's who, I'm pretty sure Kevin asked this question because we argued about it for like a whole hour over Apex, and I clearly won that argument. Okay. The last one is, the last one, and I kind of saved it because it's a great segue into the last part of this podcast. And it asked, what is your favorite TV show or movie at the moment? I got a couple, given that sometimes once I'm done with the podcast, I just sit and relax and watch TV shows or movies. One of the best TV shows I have ever seen on Netflix is called Formula One Race to Survive. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would I want to watch a bunch of cars go really fast around a circuit? And that's what I thought too. It's a little more fancier than NASCAR. NASCAR has a circle and they just go left for 500 laps. And F1 is pretty much the same thing, just laps, but in a more intricate circuit. I guess it's not a round, it's like different shapes, more corners, more straightaways. And to be honest, I clicked on it because I like fast cars. But what I learned was that the Formula One world has so much drama in it. So just a little background would be that Formula One has 10 teams. Each team has 2 drivers. Now, you would think that those 2 drivers for that one team are teammates, but they're not. They're constantly competing to become the number 1 driver in that team, and obviously competing to be the number 1 driver in the whole Formula One circuit. You have a team championship and then a driver championship, which adds more intrigue to every single race because if you get first place, you get a certain amount of points. If you get 9th place, then you get the lowest amount of points. And anything after that, you don't get points at all. So it's pretty much a race every single time to see if they can. It's like playoffs every single race, which makes it pretty interesting. On the other side, you got drama when it comes to the drivers and teams because some teams try to steal the drivers from other teams, and it's just a whole very interesting world that I got caught into, and now I'm a fan of. Like I'm listening to YouTube videos of F1s and following Ricky Ricardo, Lewis Hamilton, Sergio Perez, and just the way Netflix shot this show is insane. Like they show you the margins of error are so little when it comes to driving a car 200 miles per hour that you probably wouldn't have seen if it wasn't for Netflix slowing down 2 cars that are taking a turn, and Sergio Perez just literally like overtakes somebody by the thickness of a fucking playing card. I found myself watching this show and just holding my breath because I was like, holy shit, they're going to crash. And then they didn't. And it was just great to just watch something that you probably wouldn't have catch just watching it on regular TV. So if you are a guy and you're interested in cars and a little bit of drama, go watch F-150 Race to Survive. And the second show that I would recommend is called This is a Robbery. This is a Robbery. And it's a documentary about the heist that took place in the Boston Garden Museum. And I'm a sucker for a fucking good bank heist movie or documentary, but this one showed me something that I didn't even know was possible. So just a background, I don't want to give too much of it away, but it includes a heist, $200 million worth of art, the mob, and just finding out how interesting the federal court can be. So just to give you guys a little insight into what the documentary is about, there's this art thief that steals a Rembrandt, which is a pretty well-known artist. I know nothing about high-end art, but in this documentary, they make it seem like this guy's art is worth millions of dollars, which it is. So he steals a Rembrandt and then he gets caught for another crime. Now he's facing like 20 years in jail. And what he tells one of the prosecutors is that I'll give you the Rembrandt that I stole as a bargaining chip for no years in jail. And they agree, which is insane to me, that high-end art could be used as a get out of jail free card. So I was instantly intrigued. And what happens is that these mob bosses find out that you can do this, and they pay these guys to steal $200 million worth of paintings from the Garden Boston Museum or something like that. So I'm not gonna give it away. I don't want to tell you guys if they recovered the art or if they never found them again. So go check those two TV shows out. And if you're a girl and you don't want to check those two TV shows out on Netflix, you could also watch Ginny and Georgia, which is a show about a single mom that moves into a very wealthy neighborhood, but she has a dark side to herself. And I love a good mystery. You know, I love Gossip Girls. I like all that girly shit. I don't know why. I find it very interesting. And it caught my attention. Me and my girlfriend watched most of it together, and then she watched a lot of it by herself, which is super rude. But it was a great show to watch. You know, if you guys like girly but murder mystery kind of TV shows, go watch Ginny and Georgia. And one of the best parts about that show was the soundtrack. I think it takes anybody could put a good song in a movie and people think it's a good song or whatever. But it takes a pretty good director to have a good movie and put in a good song, and even a better director to have a good movie and that song and have it fit so perfectly with that scene that the music captures the scene and it makes you more involved while you're watching this TV show. So it has a great soundtrack, it has a great story, and it's a great show. So Netflix does not miss. Netflix is like Drake. They just keep putting out hits, you know. So go check them out. I'm running out of suggestions and I keep looking at my camera because I think it might die any moment now. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully I answered your questions to the best of my ability. And yeah, go check out those shows and thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you guys on the next episode.